Wow. Mayim. Karane Pedike Deb Lowah-Clark. Kameria Mamua Koske. Zendas Keslam Maable ne Maumale Torres Strait. Yeswa Kalaglag Able Nia Boraged Kemle Wadawaron. Able Ged Kana Kemle. My name is Deb Lowah-Clark. I am a Meriam and St. Paul Moore Island woman from Zendas Kes, you might know as Torres Straits. I'd like to thank the traditional owners of the land, the Wadawurrung people, the land that we walk on here today. And for myself and on behalf of the Eureka Centre, I want to respectfully acknowledge the Wadawurrung people who, in this space as custodians of the land and in honour of Hill Country, knowing that we are sustained by all that is country with a capital C. We want to pay our respects here, myself and on behalf of the Eureka Centre, to the elders past and present and those who are walking pathways to become leaders in this space, leaders of the future. And I acknowledge their continued connections to the country and to country and culture. So the Eureka Centre, I want to tell you that their acknowledgement online, the Wadawurrung people's land is where the Eureka Rebellion took place. Just one of many in our country's history. And it took further acknowledgement. I'm actually going to take it off the stand. How's that? It further acknowledges that though Eureka Stockade led to male suffrage in the 1858, it informed the social reforms that followed. It was over 100 years until Australia's First Nations people were able to exercise the right to vote. Food for thought. So I want to welcome the panel here this evening who are the important members of the production you just saw. And I want to welcome you here and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are gathered here with us today too. This is the Q&A part of this afternoon's event. This series of Facing Up is presented here by the Eureka Centre for NAIDOC, which is this week. Some bits and pieces happening in November too. Keep an ear out for that. And also proudly supported by Regional Arts, the fund, which is administered by Regional Arts Victoria. So important to mention those people who support this kind of production. So here we are. I'm going to assume that everyone has read the little blurbs and that's why you're here this evening. So I'm going to manoeuvre this way. Jason will tell me if I'm going to blow a speaker. I'm going to walk through some sand and some wood and take my place here. So in this place here today, we are going to share in what you just saw. I'm going to give you a moment, just give you a moment to think about what you experienced this afternoon. This Facing Up is a unique collaboration and it's a mixture of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people who have come here and who are sitting here on this stage who presented. I do want to add that I am very privileged to say that I was a part of, was it the very first in 2018 at Begonia Gardens in Ballarat Botanical?
I didn't actually hear what you
So
said.
you're nodding,
Yes,
Zerene?
Yes.
I got to be a part of this production when they walked through the bus. Did anybody experience that a few years ago? Yes.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
And I was wondering who would come, who would be in a position to hear about something like this. And I'm pleased to see that many of you are here. The conversations that I always say should happen at your kitchen table over a cuppa come from these kinds of productions that provoke thought. The thoughts that perhaps we've kept hidden quietly in our back pockets or, you know, with Uncle Lenny who doesn't want to talk about the war or what happened in his town. So when we talk about Facing Up, it was originally written by an amazing performance person who's been in Ballarat for a long time now. And when we think about how these actors, the First Nations people, give voice to the story, today we're going to ask some questions of the people who participated and the people who created not only the written form, but also the visual that you see here today. I'd like to introduce the panel to you. I don't know how many of you know, and might make sure that when I'm holding my microphone, it needs to be clear. And later on, you're going to get a chance to ask some questions yourselves. There will need to be questions rather than comments based on the fact that we don't have a lot of time. And you will need to wait for the microphone to come to you, just so that we can ensure that the recording of this is nice and clear. Events like this are becoming more and more often within our spaces, but what a great opportunity to share outside this one. So please be aware that that will be happening. So have a think if you have anything that's sitting in the back of your mind, what your question might be. So Lynden Nicholls, she's a writer and director of Facing Up, and she began her career in lots of things, including dance. Nothing you're going to share with us today, dance-wise? No, she's not going to dance for us today.
You're right, Lynden. Just nod.
And it's hard for me with the mics.
Microphones. So do I need to look at you when I'm saying it? I'm just saying that you could dance for us, but no.
No.
Okay. She's a well-known local artist and director and has a passion, as you could probably tell, for social justice, environmental issues and speaking up for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their rights. And she's worked as a lecturer not only at uni in Melbourne, but also here in Ballarat. And for 18 years was a dance movement person at the very special Melbourne Zoo even. I really want to know what that means. Running programs and teaching and performing. So we welcome Lynden Nicholls to our panel. So Zerene Jaadwa is an assistant producer for this production and one of the performers for Facing Up, and very passionate, you would have seen today, as all the performers were. Zerene is a proud Wotjobaluk woman with a Jaadwa Jali Nation connection, and she has worked in Ballarat as a performer, music director and composer. You might have seen her in other social impact productions, having worked with the Ilbijiri. I can never pronounce that. How do you say it?
Ilbijiri.
Thank you, Ilbijiri. It's all about where you accent it. Theatre company. One of my closest friends is like an original company starter of that, so I should probably know it. And also with Eagle's Nest Educational Theatre. So maybe your kids have seen her. She toured with Black Diggers. So we welcome Zerene. And we've got, I'll just say, Gus Powers, who is a set designer. You're amazing. Such an important and an impact in this production is what you see before you, underneath us and around us. So Gus is a freelance theatre maker and has worked as an artistic director for the Tasmanian Theatre Company, as a designer for Ballarat's Art Academy, and he's freelanced in costume and prop design and directed for companies such as, if you're a theatre person, you'll know all these, won't you? Were you? No? Southside Players. Sovereign Hill. There you go. Sovereign Hill. And Manila Street Productions, Cheeky Theatre, Left Boar, is it? Bower. And Humdrum Comedy. So he's here this evening. Not this evening. He's here to have, so you can ask some questions about the design if you're interested. Welcome, and Gus. Okay, his name's Adam, but he's called Gus, all right? So, Martin, is it Van de Wouw?
Van de Wouw.
Van de Wouw. I just want to point out that you're a drummer. Is that right?
Yep.
Yes, which is very important to me. I like drummers. Drummers are important. So my husband's one. So good. He's a performer in Facing Up here too. What a powerful performance and what a challenging one. You've plenty of questions, I'm sure, to ask him. He's both an actor, a professional drummer. Sorry, I've got the professional part. He's performed in a range of productions and in various roles as an interpreter at Sovereign Hill Museum. And most recently, Marty's featured as a drummer in Auntie Donna's The Live Album Australian Tour.
Woo! Go, Marty.
And of course, the beautiful Trudy Edgeley, who is a performer for Facing Up, one of our Aboriginal speakers, our First Nations speakers. For the past 15 years, Trudy has been touring in performing music in various formats. And the most dominant work that she does is with Phil. So Phil and Trudy Edgeley, you might have seen them playing amazing music. Trudy has performed throughout Australia, the UK, Europe and the USA, and her desire is to tell stories of her rich ancestry, bringing elements of soul, gospel, work song, melodies and tribal rhythms. So we welcome you too, Trudy. It's a bit of a reunion for us because Tammy and I were both involved also, so we feel like it's a reunion today of coming back together. So, look, the Barunga Statement apparently is a permanent exhibition at Parliament House to this day. After it's been there since 1991. The questions that came to me poured from this sense of watching this space and going, what made you think about doing something that was verbatim, that told a story like this? Lynden.
Am I on? I can't tell. Okay. I just have a hearing impairment, so I don't know. Hearing things is difficult. I've always found the Avenue of Prime Ministers in the Botanical Gardens, the famous avenue. There's all these busts of Prime Ministers diagonally opposite each other, sort of facing each other actually, across a pathway. I've always found it a bit boring and disappointing, and but Ballarat's quite proud of it, and people do visit the gardens to go and see them. And you know, I've watched people seeing them and looking at them, and they go and read the year that the Prime Minister sort of started off, and then that's that. So I always wanted the Prime Ministers to talk, and I thought it would be good to have one of those things where when you approached them they spoke to you, and when you went away they didn't, but that was all too expensive and we would have had to dig up the gardens, apparently, so that was a not on. So as part of the Biennale of Australian Art in 2018, Julie Collins loved the idea of me getting them to talk. She was the director of BOA, and she suggested that I make them talk about something. I needed to be very bold in what they said. And I thought, oh, gosh, all right, bold. And so the boldest thing really was for me to research the history of Indigenous people in this land from Federation and what the script really, what Prime Ministers said and what policy was. There was a big change, which many of you I'm sure know, in 1967, where after that there was federal policy, but before that Indigenous people were not the responsibility of the federal government. So you can't really say what all those early Prime Ministers said was sort of policy. It was really their opinions, it was things from Hansard, all of that stuff. But so I had the Prime Minister statements, and it was really empty without a parallel line of Indigenous protest movement, of which there was a lot. I was surprised when I first researched it that right from the beginning there were all sorts of activities that were happening sort of nationally or representing Indigenous or First Nations people nationally against what the government was saying. So, sorry, a bit of a long answer.
No, it's an important one. And as an educator, and I think as parents of people, we're all somehow related to children, aren't we? We know that knowledge is not there in the curriculum, though it's mandated. So it's an interesting concept to put together. Within that space, when you develop the performance, you developed it in the Botanical Gardens, and my other wonderings was around how you were going to create that, where we moved from Prime Minister to Prime Minister. What were you going to do in a studio? And here we are. Tell us about the idea of the element that segued everything, from the imprinting to the pouring out and the creation from the very beginning when people began. The sand. Tell us a bit about that.
I've always been really interested in my dance work, choreography and other performing in symbolism, I suppose you might call it. So I've always had this other level of expressing what I'm into, which is more symbolic. And so I knew I wanted sand and to do something with sand because of sand painting and all sorts of associations with the land. So, and talking with Gus about the set, once I clarified to myself that I wanted Zerene and Trudy to be creating the landscape, then it sort of made sense, the more we talked, that we would actually have a sort of, like this would be reminiscent of the landscape. Maybe, Gus, you want to say a bit more about that?
I can do that. When we first started, the idea was that it was a touring show. So we really started with the idea of these panels and a backdrop. It was after I wasn't in Ballarat when the original production was in the Prime Minister's Avenue. And I know when I went to watch a run of that with these lovely people, I realised that there was something missing from this very blank canvas that we'd sort of started to talk about. And I felt uncomfortable that it was a blank book. And from Federation on, it's certainly not a blank book. There's been people here for 60,000 odd years. So I couldn't start with a blank page. And after seeing it in the Botanical Gardens, realised that it needed something to support it. And I didn't want the Botanic Gardens, which is a very white man thing that's been imported into Australia. I didn't want that garden or that landscape to be a part of this. Not being from an Indigenous culture, I had to think of a way in which I could represent the country of which this show takes place. And the only language that I felt that I could claim some heritage to was topography and map making. So then I started looking at aerial photography of Australian landscapes, and that's sort of where the colour palette came from. And then the idea of using the sand was to allow the Indigenous people in the piece to create their art and finish off the landscape and make sure that it was their landscape. I think that answers the question.
It's a beautiful answer, and yeah, absolutely. It also explains, I suppose, in community we would always ask those questions about how did you make that connection. And this is and has been very much proclaimed to be a collaboration between these two worlds that we walk within, and in, whether we like it or not, is dominated by that sense of Western ways. But topography, like,
it was
what a
all
great
about topography
starting
and map making,
point.
and that's where it started. Yeah.
It's brilliant, and probably answers a lot of questions that were in my mind about how a non-Indigenous person would create a set design for an Indigenous piece, what I'd perceive to be an Indigenous story. So in that space, I thank you. Did you have something else you wanted to add, Lynden?
Oh, well, just I want to point out that right from the start, there was a lot of collaboration between us all, and sometimes I'd come up with an idea and Zerene or Trudy would say, well, we can't do that. And I'd say, oh, really? And so we'd talk about it further. For example, my first idea with the sand was that by the end of the piece, Trudy and Zerene would have created like a sand painting. And then it was like, well, I think Zerene said, well, what design would it be? And I said, oh, well, I don't know, those representations of people sitting by a fire and, all of that sort of thing. She said, no, we can't do that. And because which mob would it come from? And what language would I use? And what would be the visual language? And, and then I said, well, it's a national thing. And, so you can imagine we had lots of talks about that, and it ended up in the piles, instead, and then with the imprint. So, but there were quite a few issues. The costumes was another one, where we all talked about that. So it was very much a collaboration. Do you want to say something, Zerene?
Yeah, I think so. What I really stress, and I've been on this project since the beginning, and I've worked very heavily with Lynden, and the big aim of this work and any work that we do is, making sure that people understand that it's not just a black issue. It's not just black people talking about this stuff. What I really wanted to make people aware of is that in this space, when we're talking about our history, and if anybody lives in this country, It's your history and you should know it. It's not just a black issue, it's everybody's issue. So that community collaboration was really, really important and really, really something we wanted to drive through this entire process. And, you know, that's why we've got Gus, who's a non-Indigenous, you know, helping with the sets. And we got in a textilist to help design the garments, who's non-Indigenous herself, but she works heavily in community, you know. We really wanted to make that part of the message as well, is that we all have this responsibility to talk about and to share our history and to make sure that we acknowledge it. And in regards to, the sand piles, it was about, you know, making sure that we're representing all of the mobs, because some people aren't aware that, you know, when you're Aboriginal, well, there's, you know, there was, or there still is 500 plus, you know, mobs, language groups, you know. So we're not all the same person, not all the same people, not all the same mob. And so it was making sure we were representing everybody. And, you know, I guess the styling choice behind the handprints and the footprints is, you know, to also acknowledge, you know, those who have come before us, who have walked these lands, who have taken care of it, who we need to share those stories on behalf of. You know, we are the voice for those people. So that's the symbolism behind the footprints and the handprints in the sand.
That's great, because they were the questions I was going to ask. So thank you. And I suppose in that space, for yourself, Trudy, the homogenisation of Australia, knowing that it's not and wasn't one country and is many, here we are in a space where people get to hear that story, not in a parliamentary place or a place where it's scary and people are yelling across a board. No offence, Mr. Prime Ministers. Music does create, and performances like this does create, an amazing avenue to tell a story. So in your space, as a musician, being a part of this, has there been a particular highlight for what this has meant for you in participating in this? And I'm curious about I'm probably going to sound ignorant, the song at the end, the musical piece that you all brought together, the three of you. Can you tell us a bit about that as well?
Well, how I basically wanted it to be is a unity thing, and with reconciliation, it is mainly about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people having a relationship with non-Indigenous people. So that's where that was coming from. And just through touring the world and touring Australia with my husband, we came across people that really didn't know very much about the history of Australia. So I'm just used to doing it in music and song, then to stand here and be part of this. So it was a real eye-opener, and it was nice to have a great cast to work with. But so with that song, it was mainly the acknowledgement. I always miss with conversations with people that they don't acknowledge what actually has happened here. So that's where I was coming from with it, that if we just all acknowledge that there were people here before, you know, colonisation, that just acknowledge, that's all, that there was somebody here. You know, I've had many conversations with people saying, there was nothing here, that's a fairy tale, that didn't happen. And to me, that used to sort of blow me away. I used to think, how can you not say that? You either must be of Indigenous background. If you're saying there was nothing here, well, there was obviously something here. And it was silence, so we're that voice to be on this beautiful platform and to share that.
Thank you. And my Uncle Charles, who was a part of a Coconut Woman production, said to me he's been a part of Healing Foundations Australia, which if you've ever Googled anything Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, you will know that site. If you haven't, go and check it out. It's a lot to do with Stolen Jan and a lot to do with the healing, which is what this kind of conversation does. And I suppose with that respect, it's a place to be heard. So Marty, as the non-Indigenous performer in this space, perhaps you could just quickly share. We'll throw after this to the audience for some questions. I'm assuming you've been thinking about your questions. Somehow there's a microphone, but the challenges for you as a, you know,
privileged white fella.
Privileged white fella, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. One of my students said, is there something wrong with being white privilege? And I said to him, no, it just depends what you do with it.
And that's exactly right. I think the biggest lesson I've learned from this whole process is to abandon my ego, because that just gets in the way. You cannot engage in this discussion if your ego is in the way. A common rebuttal I hear when I confront people about Indigenous rights is they say, well, it wasn't me. It wasn't I'm not responsible for that. And that immediately, one, gets people fired up, and then it shuts you off from actually engaging in the discussion. Whereas if you abandon your ego and just be willing to engage, you start to learn. Like, I've learned that much from this piece. I didn't know half the stuff that Prime Ministers are responsible for, and it's bloody shocking. Like, you don't quite realise how awful it was. And just being willing to engage in that, I think, is the first and most important step.
Did you find it as a challenge? Can you imagine, like, being on the road? And I suppose for me, at the Botanical Gardens, one of the questions that constantly came up when we finished was, how come we didn't know? I don't know why they asked me. I don't know, because I'm a teacher. How come we didn't know this? That was a common response. I don't know if afterwards, that first time, I was kind of taken aback by it. Like, what? I don't know why you didn't know. I did. So for you, the challenge, imagining on a tour, there could very well be the questions are going to come to you, you know, in the after party each time you do the performance. No, after. Oh well, whatever happens after the show, when people ask questions, not in a forum like this, but afterwards, and perhaps your friends when you've told them what you're participating in. Have you found there to be some curiosity into what you're doing?
Absolutely. People don't realise. They had no idea. They just don't understand or know that these sort of things happened. And I'm guilty of it too. You look at the systems of oppression that we still benefit from are so ingrained into the system that it's not part of the school curriculum. It's not part of the conversations you have at the dinner table. You know, it was never mentioned when I was growing up. I'm of Dutch descent, dairy farmers. You know, we didn't talk about what the First Nations people were doing, and it really should be. It needs to be, I think, taking the stigma away from it so people do talk about it freely, and then it will become part of the norm. It just takes projects like this, people willing to engage. We've got a lot of work to do, but I think that's what we have to do, just keep working at it.
Excellent. There is a lot of work to do, and surprisingly, I mean, Mabo decision law happened in 1993. I don't know about your maths, but it's a long time ago. I just finished uni. Like, my classroom does, by the way, teach all of this. Just FYI.
My school wasn't very good.
My high school was terrible. Pretty sure they didn't even acknowledge I was black, but anyway. So, I know, it's a bit like, what? I really feel like Richard Pryor in that movie, I'm black. So, I know, all the oldies know what I'm talking about. We've got a microphone that's going to come around. So, again, I really encourage you to, if you've got something that's been provoked in your heart, in your mind, heart first, always before your head, that's what I always say. And it's a question. We'd love for you to throw it out. We've got someone, I don't know, who's running around with a mic.
Yes.
Sarah's on it.
Oh, I don't have a comedy routine prepared for in between, but...
Deb, I might get you to repeat a question for me because my battery just died.
Oh, so hang on a second.
It's dead now.
I don't know if I can... Will my microphone leave? Yeah.
Mel Hathaway. Lynden, a question for you. Before I saw the first performance of this, I saw your QR codes on the basis of the Prime Minister's Avenue, and I thought, what a fabulous way to make this go on into the future. Is there any chance of Council reinstating them?
You can imagine. Thanks, Mel. So for those who mightn't have heard, it's about originally I had QR codes which had all the statements on them. You'd do the QR thing, and as you went to each statue, and you would hear the performance. I did talk to Council about the possibility of keeping them there for a while. It sort of died a death. they had other plans to activate sculptures and statues around the city. But I personally, like, here we are, folks, if you like that idea, I personally think it'd be fantastic to have a permanent QR code on the Prime Minister's. Either with this story, or it could be about immigration, it could be about the White Australia policy, it could be about all sorts of things, and I think that would open up, you know, lots of opportunities for historians and researchers to actually research in a similar way, but this is Indigenous First Nation issues. So thanks for bringing it up, Merle. But we were a bit before our time. People were a bit nervous about using the QR codes, but now we'd all just, what's this, you know? Anyway, yeah.
That's it.
You say it, I'll
I just wonder if any politicians have seen this and what their reaction has been.
The question was, have any this is for the recording. Have there any politicians who have seen this, and
What's their reaction?
and what has been their reaction?
I don't know. I don't know if any politicians have seen this. I did a few days ago take a flyer about the show into Catherine King, whatever her name is, Settle, and the other one, like three different politicians, and they were all the people in the office were amazingly interested and very enthusiastic, but they're not standing up saying they're here now. So maybe they're coming on Thursday. I don't know. I really would like there to be a bit of a political interest.
But Lynden, what about the direct descendant? Lynden, what about the direct descendant who got in contact with us? Alfred's direct descendant. Alfred Deakin.
Oh, yes. I don't know. Is Peter Sharp here? Yeah,
Oh,
Peter,
hello,
do you want to
Peter.
say
Come
something?
around. Hi. Lovely to have you in the audience.
Can you just wait a second? Can you just wait for the microphone, because we've got one with a battery now.
I'd just like to say thank you for such a wonderful performance. I think it's. I saw the first one and that was fantastic, and this has just gone on from there. It's. I think it's going to be a knockout.
Peter, everybody,
So
is
important.
Alfred Deakin's great-great-grandson? Is that it? Yeah.
And
So he's not really a politician, but sort of.
I should just say, add something to, I think someone was saying along the way that the Prime Ministers didn't, they were just quoting from Hansard and things. Well, in the case of Barton and Deakin, they actually they crafted the Constitution, they crafted all that. In fact, Barton's statement was probably written by Deakin, and that's coming from the Constitution. And Deakin was so responsible, and boy, you just don't know how responsible he was. That's a story that's yet to come, and it's I think, to put it in a nutshell, Deakin himself was probably, there's one person most responsible for the stolen generations, it's him. And it began when he was in State Parliament for 10 years, in the colonial Parliament, sorry, that's the colony then, the colony of Victoria, because he was responsible for passing the 1886 Half-Caste Act, and that's where it really all began. And it was part of his long-term plan, which led to the White Australia policy in the federal legislation. So I better not go on anymore.
Are you actually an historian?
It's a fantastic. This is going to, I think, really make a huge contribution to the.
Thanks.
We will.
Congratulations.
You just need to nod your head, sir. Are you actually an historian? Because that sounded very historian-like. Are you an historian? No, I'm a sheepdog trainer. Excellent. Well, you're a very well-informed sheepdog trainer. Sorry, do we have another question? Stop the back. Knew there was one somewhere.
Hello, congratulations and thank you very much for your amazing performance and the set and everything else. But I'm just wondering, is there a program or have you got a grant to go on a national tour? Because this obviously needs to be seen by children. I would say I've got a young nephew who is doing Australian history at the moment, and all he's interested in is the Eureka question. And I've got plenty of books about that, but obviously very sheltered. They're not teaching it in schools. I mean, fantastic that it is, you know, some individuals that are doing it, but unfortunately, I'm just wondering, you know, how long till you can get to Canberra and around the nation and internationally, I would suggest. It would be the best thing in the world. So anyway, Juliana Addison is the member in Ballarat who actually goes to Parliament. She actually has, you know, various meetings with them, so get in her ear. I don't think Catherine King's going to do anything. I think Juliana Addison will. And I'm sure there are plenty out there who've seen it today, and we can get on the bandwagon.
Do you want me to answer this one?
So there is the possibility and a hope through some support to do a tour of this, if beginning in Victoria then too. Is that correct?
Yeah, look, we have every intention of touring this show to the schools community, the education community in Victoria, starting off regionally next year. That's sort of our aim. And because we've done our best, Gus's helped to make it, you know, tourable in the back of a van. But as Trudy mentioned to me a few days ago, look, it's really a national story. And so, you know, it would just be a dream, really, to sort of take it in a few other places. So I do have a book here and also some of my cards that I'd love people who've got ideas about where they might think that this show could go. We're really open to ideas because that's the only way we can generate a tour or whatever. So I'd love you to take away my email address or write your details in a book so that we can follow up some of these things into the future, because this is just the beginning, I feel.
And it's a little COVID difficult, but I think beyond that there are so many possibilities. I'm all about bundles of possibilities. So this is where white privilege comes into play if you are a non-Indigenous person. I'd just like to spruik the possibility of you going out and handing out some cards and meeting some people on behalf of Lynden.
Oh, yes. Just before you all go, sorry. Alice, we do have received funding from a wonderful fund called Pool of Dreams, and Pool of Dreams has provided us $10,000, I'm not embarrassed to say the amount of money, to employ both Sparky, a photographer who's been wandering around, but the purpose of that money is to create resources that will support this as a performance. So we've got Sparky and we've got Alice Barnes, a fantastic educator who's worked at Sovereign Hill for many years and done all sorts of things, and Rebecca Pham Longa, who's a Wathaurong woman who's working at the moment in education in Broome. So they're going to work together from two perspectives, Indigenous First Nation perspective and whitefellow perspective, on getting together resource material and education package with lesson plans, etc., etc. So it really will be a very comprehensive package to tour in schools and to travel through different communities, which we're pretty excited about.
We have two more. The lovely lady in the red hat and the lovely Nikki Foy, and we might come to a conclusion there, but we'll see how we go.
And I'd really like to say thank you and acknowledge that you provided us an interpreter for today.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
make a suggestion? And I know it's not a question, but instead of, we rely on council, that every one of us have neighbouring schools in your communities. And I think there's a great opportunity here for schools to come together as cluster groups to get you to come out to the school and to perform. I know there's people here who work in the Department of Education and, can voice their, make their voices loud. But I just think it's absolutely something that should be shown in schools, because we do, all of us have, we've got to unlearn what we've learned from trusted people the whole time we all went through schools. But going knock on your neighbouring school's door to say, you know what, we watched Facing Up. We want our kids in our neighbourhood to watch it too.
Thank you, Nikki.
And I think that's our goal with this project. I've always said to Lynden, this will be great in schools. From the very moment we did the first one in 2018, and there was a lot of community, cry out for it, take it to schools, get in the young minds, that's where they're most susceptible, we can reprogram. And so, well, you can. They're impressionable. But yeah, so the long-term goal, and we're just, trying to navigate that pathway of how do we get there. So, starting off small, like a show like this, getting it out to community, and then moving from there. And that's where we've got, these grants to bring in educators, and we're working with community, educators and program facilitators. So fingers crossed, watch this space. That's the end goal that we want, is to be touring this to schools. Yeah.
Thank you. We don't have much time left to have any more questions, but that's a really good point. Sometimes, and I know as a community member, we forget the power that we have. It's not always about a collective, it's about us as individuals and the changes that we can make in our own backyards. Thank you to those who brought their children. Did you kids enjoy that? Did you know about some of that stuff? I took my dog to dog training, and the lady who was training my dog, he did pass. I was a bit scared. She came, and the third day I was with a principal and an assistant principal, and she said, now, you've been talking about all this stuff. I just drove past the school. There was a flag that was the Australian one, and then there was the Aboriginal one. Then there was this one that was green on the bottom and top, and I was sitting there. And then I went to go, and the young boy who is in year 8 just said, oh, that's the Torres Strait Islander flag. And I was like, nice. And I said, yes, that's my flag. And she went, oh, and you could see her face. Let fear not be a reason not to ask a question. Let fear not be a reason not to provoke a question or a thought. It doesn't matter if you do something wrong as a non-Indigenous person, we will tell you, and you just don't do it again. It's pretty simple. That's what I always say. So I want to thank Eureka Centre. I would like you to thank the cast and the crew of this amazing production, Facing Up. Let it not be the last. It won't be the last. You're all amazing. And I want to also thank the Eureka Centre for allowing us to be here, to Arts Victoria for the support they've given, and for the awesome people who have maybe supporting the future. And just so you know, they're talking about me. I work for the Department of Education. So I'll be on to that.
I just got to say, really, Regional Arts Victoria has been amazingly generous in supporting this work. They paid for this transformation, really, and for the original show. So they've supported this Facing Up right from the beginning. The Pool of Dreams money was fantastic. Yeah, so I think there's support out there. We just have to dig around and find it. But I needed to say thank you. And thank you, Tammy, and the interpreters, and Deb as well.
Be safe, COVID friendly, and take this to your kitchen table, have a cuppa and talk about it. Thank you, everyone.